The All Black podcast is powered by our official cloud software partner, SAP, helping our teams in black become the best run teams in sport. To listen to this episode and all the All Black podcasts, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcasts. This is the All Blacks podcast.
Kia ora whanau, welcome to the All Black podcast powered by SAP. The opening test of the year is almost upon us, and it's against a side that was last in New Zealand in 2014. It's hard to believe. The All Blacks play England on July the 6th at Forsyth Bar Stadium in Dunedin, the first of two test matches. To preview these games is Will Carling, former English player and captain, 72 caps for his country, 59 as captain, and a role we took on at 22 years of age, which is pretty unbelievable. Welcome to the pod, Will. How are you going? Sorry it's a bit early, mate, but you're looking pretty fresh.
Morning, evening, Rob, whatever. Yeah, all good. So thanks for having me on.
No worries. Now, look, hey, let's be honest. It's a wee while since you strapped on the boots, but, what do you get up to today? Do you still... get down to Twickenham and watch some games? Are you still involved in rugby? Like, what's your capacity in terms of the game of rugby itself?
I got involved a bit when Eddie was there in terms of helping with a bit of leadership, but not anymore. Since Steve. So occasionally go to Twickenham. But yeah, hey, do you know what? I don't watch a lot of rugby. You don't want to be one of those sad old guys who things around, going, "Don't know who I am," and everyone goes, "We don't care."
Yeah.
I occasionally watch the odd England game, but yeah, not a lot.
Mate, that's probably not a bit. Probably got things to do, I'd suggest. Mate, like what we do with all our guests is do a few warm-up questions before we get into it, and sort of, particularly at our age. But do you have a favourite player growing up, and why? Can you remember anyone that was, poster on the wall maybe, or someone down at the local rugby club?
Yeah, mine's just a bit confusing because my dad was in the army and he was in a Welsh regiment. So, I was English, but I didn't work out. So all my heroes when I was growing up were things Gareth Edwards and JPR Williams, these great Welsh players, right? And then my dad, it got to about 6 or 7, broke the news to me that, no, you're English, you play in white and you lose. And it was like, oh, okay. So it was like, yeah, it was a bit of a blow. But so JPR probably. David Duckham was probably my favourite English player. We're talking that long ago.
Yeah, but it's pretty awesome. And I even think, anyone who's a bit of a rugby tragic like myself, they've all seen, the famous try for the Barbarians against the All Blacks, and it goes pretty much through the hands of all those players you just mentioned. And while... yeah, mate, you eventually found out you're English, but the Welsh were strong through the 70s, weren't they? They were an amazing rugby side that played probably a brand that was a bit of ahead of themselves, maybe, or be you right in saying that?
Yeah, it was. They had some players. Phil Bennett, Barry John. You go through some of that stuff. It was like, yeah, we. So growing up as an English, we didn't win a lot. It wasn't great.
Yeah, oh mate, they're a good side, and geez, the core of them went on and beat the All Blacks in a Lion series as well. So pretty good side through the 70s. Most influential person in your rugby career? We all have crossroads and sliding door moments. Was there someone who was really influential in terms of you getting into rugby and your career?
There's probably it. There was a teacher when I was at school who without getting heavy, when I first went to school, they put me a year above, which is like the worst thing you can ever do to a kid, because you get to a new school, you just want to fit in, and this school was quite into its rugby, and then suddenly this new kid was playing a year ahead of himself, and I was petrified. These kids were all way bigger, and I just wanted to try and make some friends in my year, and the teacher who was in charge was quite a stern bloke, so it really almost put me off rugby for good. And this guy Dick Mowbray was sort of the following year. He was just an outstanding coach, really good fun. He was a young guy, I loved it. So I had 2 years being coached by him.
Yeah.
And so it had a massive impact. And that, for me, I suppose it was Jeff Cook who was the guy who became manager of England, picked me sort of for the North, and then picked me for England and made me captain. So he's not the smartest bloke, but I liked him.
Yeah, totally, mate. Mate, it's those formative years, isn't it? Like, someone influential at that time is so important. So it's great to hear that you had someone there through that schooling period. I ask all players who come on this, All Blacks, Australians, Timmy Horan, yourself, like, where's your first England Test jumper? And do you remember being named? You're pretty young.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't know where it is. I'm not a.
That'd be the first time we've had that. I'd say that'd be the first time that answers come back. I don't know where it is.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm not a. At home, I don't have any memorabilia around. I don't have any rugby stuff. It's weird, isn't it?
There's good cash in that. You've missed out. You've missed out there. There's good cash in that stuff.
Do you know what, Rob? It's just for all sorts of reasons. It was I felt you got way too much profile when I was playing, and right. For me also, once rugby was over, I think I had a few mates, and I went round and sort of saw that their kids, they used to have a lot of memorabilia around, and their kids would sort of start telling me what their dad had done, and I just thought, look, when I have kids, I just want to be dad. I don't want and with that sort of heavy and that's so I didn't want a load of stuff.
Yeah.
So I not a load of stuff. I think there's stuff in the loft. I mean, there is a true story, like when the two younger boys Jack was the youngest, was probably about 7, and Henry was 8, and he comes home from school one day, Henry, and he goes, it was great. He goes, my mate's dad said he used to play for England, right? And I sort of looked at him. I went, and he goes, well, did you? And I'm like, it doesn't really matter, does it? But hey, So eventually, I said, okay, yeah, I did. It was a long time ago. And he goes, you got any shirts? I said, they're in the loft. I think they're somewhere in the loft. I had no idea where they were. And he said, do you ever play at Twickenham? And I was like, yeah, once or twice. And he's a persistent little shit. Yeah. And so eventually, in the evening, Lisa goes, go. So I found the shirt. Of course, they're an old shirt. Do you know what I mean? It's the old cotton.
It's like a blanket.
But, yeah. So he's sort of looking. He goes, oh, so you played 13. And little Jack's there, 7. He was sitting on the floor. And it was just brilliant because I said, Jack, do you want to have a look at this? And he just goes, he gives me this look like, he just goes, no. And he gave me the look like, you're a very sad man. And I just looked at him and said, really? Why is that? He goes, you didn't play for England. Didn't I? And he went, no. And I said, why is that? He said, because you're my dad and you're too fat. And he just got up and walked off, right? And it was just this, you sad individual. And I'm lying on the floor laughing. It was just one of those great moments. But
tell me straight, son. Tell me straight, son. Crikey.
Oh, hey, and he was right. But so no, I think what the first one's probably at my junior school. I think that's where it was. But geez, no idea.
Yeah, mate. Look, go to the playing days a little bit, and hopefully there's a couple of people that spring to mind. Best player you played with and best player you played against. You did play for a long time. And you did play with and against some fantastic rugby players.
Yeah. So best player I played with was probably Zinny.
Yep.
Not to sort of curry favour in New Zealand, but I think,
but it works. It'll work.
Yeah. But you played Test rugby, and you played with some good players. But then I think Zinny was one of those, and probably Campese maybe who were just different level.
Yep.
And so Zinny played against maybe Campo, or Philippe Sella, great French centre, played against him loads of times. So. Yeah. Probably one of that lot, or again, or Michael Jones. I mean, that guy was incredible.
Unreal. Look, you had the privilege in the amateur days of getting on tour. It's perhaps not something in the professional rugby that's done as much, and if it is, they're very, very short tours. Best tourist, like if you're, I know probably a skipper, you probably got your own room, but if you're looking for a roommate, and I've no doubt actually that when you were captain, there still would have been a huge amount of pressure. Like, was there a best mate or someone who was just hugely enjoyable to go on tour with?
Yeah, there was loads of them. I think actually one of the best ones was Robert Jones, Welsh scrum half, because he just so because when I went on the Lions tour in '93, I was awful. You just had one of the shocking tour. I was was just an embarrassment. And he was outstanding, fun, really enjoyed it. And it was weird for me, you get to know guys who you played against.
Yeah.
That's the weird thing about the Lions. And afterwards, you're sort of playing against him again for what just wasn't the same. It just, you suddenly, you're caught in a ruck and he's giggling and you're like, Jonesy, this is not right, mate. This is,
Can't hate the guy anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, it was shocking. So he was probably one of my favourites. Just things that you can't really talk about. But back in those days, geez, he had a great
good fun
view of life. Would be would be one way of putting it.
Mate, that's good. That's a whole nother podcast, I think. Look, if it wasn't rugby, and I know in many regards, rugby wasn't professional then, so you wasn't necessarily your job. But if it wasn't rugby, it ended up taking up so much of your time for, near 8 years or longer, what do you think? What profession do you think you would have got into?
Well, I was meant to. I was in the army. I was going in the army, so I think I would have been in the army. Yep. And my dad was in the army. That's where I was going, and until I managed to get picked, and then you just you couldn't do both. So if I hadn't played, I would have gone in the army and tried a few things there, I think.
Wow, a completely different life that could have been. Look, like we do with all the guests that we get on the podcast, and really interested in this because so often the journey or the stories or how some of our All Blacks got into rugby is quite similar. But how did you get into rugby? What did it look like growing up for you? I know rugby's a really popular sport in England, but football's massive, and there is a few other options for young fellas. Why'd you get into footy, and what did your journey look like?
So I was like classic. I was sent away when I was about 6.5 to school because my dad was in the army. So arrived at the school and I played all the sports. You played cricket, played rugby, and played hockey. Enjoyed cricket. Rugby just loved it for some reason. You played back then. You played full contact straight away.
Yeah.
And I was a fat little kid. I started as a hooker. It was just like, but I think probably after 2 games, I realised that wasn't, I think I went to number 8 for a while. And then decided that I think I was a back. It was just like, but just there's something about rugby. Loved it. And got into it, from age of 7.
Mate, I love it. And was it, once you sort of got the bug and I'm pretty sure you would have been a pretty fast hooker at the start before you made the move out into the backs and found your spot. But, did you start thinking, this is something, I want to play for England, I want to play internationally? Did that become a sole focus, or which it does a lot today for a lot of people getting into the game today? It is like that. Was it like that for you, or you still were up until almost the point you were picked, thinking you were going to be in the army, or thinking you were going to do something else, and you just continued to play rugby on the weekends, or when did it sort of kick in that England was an option?
Well, England was the dream, and it was a dream. So we used to play in green and white hoops this school, But for me, you used to get changed. Used to dream you were in an England changing room, and used to run out, and it was like used to run over about 3 pitches. That was the tunnel. You used to dream you were in Twickenham, and I did every game. You just thought, I'm playing for England. That was the dream, and I think it was such a dream that you never quite understood that you could cross from me actually playing for England. That was a whole different mind, sort of messed you up. But actually, I from year dot basically, it was like that was the dream, was like, and loved it. I never thought, because it was amateur, you never thought, I might go in the army or whatever. But I still my ultimate dream was always was playing rugby for England.
I love it. And as a young man, with the All Blacks on your radar at all, we're talking to you off camera a little bit, and like these days, I feel like I can watch any game at any time. It's very global. We're very connected. I feel like I know a lot of the Six Nations players and kind of where they're at and how they're going and who's won the last game and that. But what the All Blacks are like for you as a young person, was that not on your radar? You sort of saw England, Wales and thought, I want to play at Twickenham, I want to play at Cardiff, or was the All Blacks on your radar, at least in some way, shape or form?
Yeah, no, for sure. You sort of think you used to watch them if they came over. There was the Lions tour down to New Zealand. Well, I was a bit young, but it was just like watch the Barbarians game. Obviously, you saw clips of that. I remember reading Graham Murray's book, Captain.
Yeah, good.
Was fascinated by him. They came over. Was that 78ish, and they won the sort of the Grand Slam over here. And for me, it was just like that they were the best team in the world. So you were just sort of like as a youngster that you were looking, you're like, how the hell do they do that? And how did he do that sort of thing? It was, I was fascinated by them, and you were sort of you're completely in awe of them because, their record was just outstanding. So it was just like, once you start and dream, you just, maybe that's just me. You're constantly sort of looking, thinking, geez, how? Yeah. And they, for 100 years plus, isn't it? They've been the team.
Mate, that's awesome to hear, and I want to sort of take that into your own career. Like you made the side really young, made it pretty quickly from what I can tell as well. Like it was quite a rapid rise into the side, and then even more rapidly been given the captaincy at age 22. Like, did you know this was coming? Like, was there a bit of a process? Like you said, Jeff Cook in many ways was perhaps a little bit ahead of his time. Did he give you a heads up and say, what do you think, mate? Or was it just on the radio, and Captain Will Carling, like how did that happen?
I think, look, hey, do you know what? I joke, just desperation, I think. And it's weird, actually, because like the year before when I first got picked, which was 8 months before I was made captain, you still had final trials, right? And I made the final trial, but I wasn't in the probables, I was in the possibles. And then the two guys who were centre both got injured, right? So I got my chance.
Tragedy.
So I followed the guy. But it's amazing. So you sort of think, I wasn't actually meant to get picked for England in at that point. And then, 8 months later, you're made captain. And Jeff had never, ever talked to me about it at all.
Really? Wow.
No, and we had toured Australia. Hadn't gone well. We'd lost, both Tess and I just left university, so I was late for that tour. And I honestly, when he rang, it's a joke. I thought I was being dropped because we were playing Australia in about 2 weeks' time, 10 days' time. And if Jeff rang you, that meant if you had played the last game, if he rang you, you were being dropped, basically. So I thought I'd been dropped, and And he basically almost hinted that he was ringing everyone who had played the last test who wouldn't be playing against Australia. And I just went, well, thank you, Jeff. And he just went, no, not you. He said, I want you to be captain, Will. And I'm like, he was a Northern Yorkshireman and not a sense of humour. And I just laughed. I went, yeah, right, Jeff. I said, what do you want? He said, I'm being serious. And I'm like, wow. Okay. Yeah, it was just out of left field completely. And not being funny, I my dream was playing for England. I'd never dreamt of captaining England had never been on the radar for me.
Yeah.
It was never anything I'd ever thought of. So you think it really was just one of those moments where it's like you put the phone down and go, shit.
But mate, like, was it?
Why did you say yes?
Yeah. Did I say yes? But there's,
Why?
I didn't realise this until I started looking into it a bit more. But like, I saw, being someone who's watched rugby over the last 20, 30 years, I consider England a really strong side. There's been peaks and troughs, but there's been times when England's been really strong. But then when you look back, the record through the 70s and the 80s wasn't great, and you hadn't won the Five Nations as it was at the time for a really long time. And perhaps was that just Jeff saying, to the point you made a little bit earlier, we've just got to do something completely different here. We're going to go in a different direction, try something new. But the reality is still, when I look at it, a 22-year-old back, and perhaps rugby's moved on a little bit then, but perhaps the backs weren't seen as tough leaders, perhaps, and you still had Bayfield and Dooley and I don't know, some of these huge humans who can I imagine were somewhat conservative, or maybe I don't know if they would have embraced a 22-year-old straight off the bat. It's quite daunting.
No, and you also, joking aside, the forwards, Brian Moore, Winterbottom, Teague,
Yeah. Dean
those kind of
Richards,
guys.
yeah.
And then you've got the privately educated, what's his name? And it was just like, what the hell? And I think it was, it was a hell of a shock for me, let alone. Yeah, I remember everyone was trying to work out who was going to be captain, and we had the weekend off, and we were at this Richmond rugby club. Winters was there,
Great
Brian, Simon Halliday, yeah. And we were watching, Quins were playing, and we were all being given the weekend off, and everyone's debating who's going to be captain, right? And I'd had the call from Jeff, right? So I'm standing there,
oh, wow.
And they're all going, I think it could be so, and it could be, and I just sort of eventually I went, I could be me. And they all just went, shut up, Will. And it was just like, and you're like, Christ, this is going to go well.
Yeah, wow.
It was, and not being funny, years later with Lisa, because I never asked Jeff, this maybe 10 years ago, it wasn't that long ago. He lives up in Yorkshire, and Lisa's mum was up there. And one day I said, look, we're going to, on the way up to you, I'm going to have lunch with Jeff. And she said, why? I said, because I've never asked him why he made me. And she went, oh, great. Fascinating. But so we did, and I sat with him, and in this pub, and he obviously knew why we'd, and eventually I said, go on, Jeff, what, why? Thinking he was going to come out with all these great little lines like you would, and he goes, well, if you remember, we'd picked Mike Harrison, he hadn't made it. We then picked Nigel Melville, who then got injured, his ankle, and then John Allwyn. He said, so we'd had 3 captains in 6 games, and things weren't going well, and basically it was the last roll of the dice, and I'm like, great. And it was just sort of great. So and he sort of had this smile on his lips, and he was like, I'm not going to blow smoke up your ass, it was just
yeah. So but what it was,
I think actually, joking aside, there was part of it was like, Christ, we've got to try something different.
Yeah, mate, it's pretty cool. And one thing I definitely want to ask you about is like you say, we joke about the the staunch northerner, and I've spent a lot of time in UK, so I know exactly what you're talking about. But back then, there wasn't 7 assistant coaches and extra managers and logistics people and all that sort of stuff. It was quite brave from Jeff to do it. But then also the question to you is, there wasn't a leadership team, there wasn't any mentoring that I know of, or any sort of preparation for someone. It was literally name you on Tuesday and go out there and play on Saturday. Like, did you have a plan? Like, trying to address some of these old gnarly dogs, like, or was it just, geez, I've just got to go out there and play well for a start or something,
I think for me, I do remember standing up in front of them for the first time, and it was just, being petrified. But you're looking, and it just sort of hit me like, you think, geez, they've got all this experience that sits in the room. And, for me, it's like, if I can start getting them to talk about what do we need to change, how do we need to make this work? Because as you say, we weren't winning anything, and my view was, geez, we've got great players in this room. And these guys are my heroes. I'd watched them at school, playing for England. So it was quite hard. And, but my view was, I just want you to start telling me what we need to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so I sat with them individually. I sat with them as in sort of groups, and it really was. I read every book there was on bloody leadership, and it was about trying to get them involved in it, and I do, without getting serious, I think leadership is like servant leadership. I think. The real art of leadership is getting the best out of your team. It's not telling them what to do. It's not, I wasn't at 22, and as you say, as a back, I'm not going to be going, right, you're going to do this. And the answer would have been fairly short and ending in off, and so it was more like, come on, guys, this is the, playing for England. It's like, we've got to make this work, and how are we going to make this work? And you've got the ideas, you know what we need to change. And Jeff Cook doesn't get anywhere near enough credit for all of that. He was the guy, in a sense, who changed it all by, some consistency of selection. He actually, it actually enabled people to start getting a sense of team. Before, England just used to pick, drop, and
Yep.
and there was never any sense of, this is us as a team. So I was really lucky. He was the guy who gave it the foundation, and then getting the players to actually have some confidence and work out the little bits that needed change. We started developing a bit of momentum. But I had no plan before that. It's just it was just I think you read about bits, but it's basically I wanted us to have something more than as an identity. I wanted us to have an identity as an England team, and you'll know what it's like up here, right? If you're England, and there's the history, there's the empire, and it still is that you can't talk passionately about being English because you're just arrogant, right? And
Totally.
It's the weird history. So everyone else is the Scots, the New Zealanders, the Aussies. Everyone can be really passionate about being, but the English, as soon as you start, they go, "Oh, it's arrogant."
Yeah.
And
Shut
that
up.
drove me because it's just like, I'm English and this is my dream, and I want to be as passionate about playing for England as anyone else is about playing for their country. But there's that whole bit in the media is like, "No, you're an arrogant." So somehow we had to generate that pride, that passion, that real feeling of who we were, and that took a while, but I think we got there.
Man, it's awesome, and you sort of speak pretty humbly, but like you're ahead of your time a little bit in terms of trying to develop relationships with all the players, trying to empower people, and like you say, not as a do as I say, but actually trying to get people's opinion and buy them in. That's all the stuff we hear about leadership in sports teams today. But it obviously worked because over a couple of years, and then in the 90s, you started to experience some success. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the good memories in the jersey, because I think we're starting to understand it a little bit more in this part of the world. But I was very fortunate enough to go along to some Six Nation games. I was fortunate enough to watch a lot of rugby in the Northern Hemisphere. It's a great experience. Like, it really is. It's a whole day. It's a festival. You start off at lunch and you travel your way to the game. It's a real carnival atmosphere. All the stadiums are cathedrals, and then, like you say, perhaps not the English when you first started out, but the Welsh are loud, the Irish are loud, the Scottish are loud. They're very passionate supporters. We Kiwis are very polite. We just sit in the stands and clap and watch the game, and not too extroverted at all, really, to be honest. It was probably the best atmospheres of rugby I watched when I was overseas. But do you want to pick a couple of memories for you, good and bad? Because when you it's hard to explain how brutal the rugby was as well. Like, the French are crazy. Like, if you look up some of the YouTube stuff, like a couple of your games, there's one that's literally called the most brutal game of rugby in history. That's one against the French, and it's just a cage fight. It's an organised fight at some stadium, and then the quarter final that you won 10-9. There's some great games in there. Is there a couple of really fond memories?
Yeah, I mean, I love playing the French. So my first cap was against the French, and it was against Seller. And you sort of, I thought that it would be the first and last. And so playing in Paris was just an amazing atmosphere. And also, I think we knew it in that period. Blanco and Seller, Lagier, because they had some outstanding players, Caban, and they could score. I mean, geez, I remember them scoring. I think it was in '94. They scored a length of field try against the All Blacks.
Killer.
That's what they could.
They
did it to us. Yeah, and you're sort of thinking, so although the games were unbelievably brutal, which was probably more our fault, because our view was, if we just play rugby, they're going to beat us, right? So we need to unsettle, and we need to actually put them off, and so basically get them fighting and we stand a chance. So it basically, when you played the French, and certainly in Paris, they used to get themselves so worked up. You were captain, used to go down this tiny little tunnel out before going out the main one, and they would come down theirs. And I remember probably the game you're talking about for '92, you're standing at the front and they put all their forwards, and they came out and they sort of spilled in the tunnel. Some of them are crying, some of them are bleeding, right? And I'm standing there trying to show no emotion, right? You're just looking at them thinking, what the hell has been going on in there, right? And you go out, they're crying at their anthem, and then all hell lets loose. But it was just, but there's something about that, and then maybe that's what's wrong with me. You love that, right? You go out with your guys, and it's going to go off. Yeah. And that's why you play. It's the challenge of actually staying controlled and trying to work it out and wanting to win. And when you come back in from games like that and lie in a changing room and you just look at each other, it's just like, it's quite hard to explain. That's a great feeling. And I loved the French. But as you say, playing for England I remember we went up to Scotland in '90 it was a Grand Slam game. We lost, and it was probably the most hostile environment I've ever played in. The Scots really don't like the English. It's sort of, it is, and that's what happens up here. And I remember we played them again in '95, which was at Twickenham for a Grand Slam, and I had to do this interview with a Scottish journalist, and I remember it in this hotel, Cafe Royal, and you didn't have media people then, anyone. It was just, I turned up to do this interview with him as captain, and this guy sort of obviously didn't like me, and you can't blame him, but it was just like, he gets to the end of the interview and he goes, right, well, he goes, last question, and I'm like, oh God, he goes, how do you take the fact the whole of Scotland hates you? Right. And I was sitting there and I was sort of looking at him, and I sort of went, that's fine. He goes, really? And I just leant forward. I said, yeah. I said, because I bloody hate you. Right. And he got his head. And I used some other language. I said, mate, trust me here. I hate you a damn sight more than you hate me. With a few other words, right? And he's just sitting there looking at me. But I'm like, Christ, and part of was me. If you're Scottish or Welsh, or if you're going to hate us, well, I'll hate you back. Yeah. And it's because I want to win. And I want us to win. But there is, as you say, there's something really passionate about the Six Nations as it is now. And I think that makes it really special.
Mate, there is, and it's hard to describe and encourage any rugby lover to try and get to a game at some stage, because I think it's a couple of things you touch on. You are sort of drawing on the history of the countries, and it's centuries and centuries old, and sort of we definitely don't want to go to war anymore or anything, but that, I suppose, modern sport is a version of that, where you can channel some of the history and all that sort of stuff. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, and again, you're hinting at it there, like a young fella, no media training, a few gaffes along the way, perhaps. I don't know whether you'd say that, but like,
worse than that.
But also what comes through, jokes aside, is that you're hugely competitive and you're hugely driven to change the environment, not just in terms of playing, but how the team represented itself. How, to the extent I think you did quit your job and you tried to throw yourself 100% into the role of being England captain well before there was media training, and there was a media liaison person, and there was a commercial manager, and there was all this sort of stuff. But it's almost you could see there was a job to do. Is that a fair comment? Which is pretty forward thinking for a start, a 22-year-old, and then obviously, I'm sure you learnt along the way from the things you did well and the things you did badly.
Yeah, I worked for a company, Mobil Oil, up here, and sort of when I left the army, and then you get made captain, and there was so much that needed to be done, and there just was, right, and you didn't have as you say, all the staff that they have now. They didn't have anyone, and my view was, I don't know how long I'm going to do this for. You could get dropped next game, whatever it was, but I just thought I would always regret the rest of my life if I didn't give it everything I could give it. So I gave up my job, and I remember going around to my parents for dinner and said, by the way, I've given up my job. And I remember my mum going, all right, so what are you going to do? I went, I don't know. I said, but I've got to get this stuff sorted out. There's so much to need. And she goes, well, what are you going to do about money? I went, I genuinely don't know. And in a way, you're so young that you just don't really think about all the serious stuff, thank God, because it was crazy. And I look back and think, so many times you used to look at the bank account and think, Christ, I've got 50 quid left or whatever it was, but it was about, I wanted to get it right. I wanted us to be focused. I wanted the guys to have what they needed to have. I introduced upward appraisal in a rugby team, right? Which was, you can imagine forwards getting sheets of paper. It's just like, instead of, and I'm going, guys, I want you to answer these things, not with just F off. It's like, I need to get better. You need to tell me what I need to improve and all this. And they were just like, look at me like, what is wrong with you? But I think hopefully it just started to, we started to get an identity and a bit of a passion and a pride. And for me, that's, you don't know how long you've got it for, and it's not about you. It's about what can we create as a team, and how can I get the best out of them. And I just believed that they were great players, and I wanted us to win rugby games, and I thought we were capable of it, but we needed to put a huge amount of time and effort into it, and no one else was doing it.
Mate, it's awesome. And I know, you won't say these things, but you took the team from, winning 30 or 40% of its games to closer to 70 or over 70, which is awesome. And I wonder if there's a moment or two along the journey when you sort of thought, some of these old Grizzly guys, I've not turned them, but I've got their respect, because I can imagine that can be, for all the, winning a Five Nations or any sort of individual accolades, like getting the respect of your peers is almost, from what I hear, because I just don't know, but from high performance people who've been involved in high pressure situations, having the respect of your peers is almost, one of the most wonderful things. I'm surely at some stage you must have felt you had the change room, and perhaps you didn't as a 22-year-old.
No, and I'm sure I didn't. You know damn well you didn't, and I'm not sure you ever. I think the only time, which was probably I would think that the best moment for me is people sort of go, "Oh, do you know what? I miss running out in front of all those 80,000 people. I miss this," and you're like, I don't mean to be nasty, but it's like, why? They don't know who you are. And for me, it was always about your teammates, right? And if it's exactly what you said, if those guys thought I'd done okay, that was it for me.
Yeah.
And I never knew until I played my last game as captain, and injured my ankle. But anyway, after the formal dinner, Jerry Guscott sort of goes, "Well, we're going for a beer," and I'm like, okay. And I'm on these crutches, and it's great. So we go into this pub, which was 100 yards down the road from it. And all the guys who had been there at the beginning had all come for a beer because it was my last game as captain. And for me, it was probably the most, for me, it was just that moment where you think, okay, it was really special. I mean, like really, really, where I'm just like, oh, okay, I did okay. And that is the best moment for me. Nothing to do with anything that happens in public, anything that, for me, it was changing rooms or things like that. That's what it's about, because they really know you, and they know what an arsehole you are. And they know all the stuff that you go through in terms of the emotions and build up to games. They see it, and they see you. And if they think you're okay, that's pretty good.
So good. Well, let's talk a little bit about the All Blacks. England haven't been here for a long time, but let's firstly talk about your experiences. I mean, do you remember going in to play the All Blacks for the first time? One thing that's really stands out is 72 games you played or something like that. You only played the All Blacks 3 times in the England jumper and maybe one more for the Lions. Like that's not much, Do you remember, playing the side for the first time? Yeah,
which was the 91 World Cup. And you're sort of thinking, and there was an aura, and I remember in the build-up, you're trying to get over that. This is the All Blacks, and obviously they'd won the first World Cup, and they had a hell of a side still, some incredible players, and you were just like, look, we can win, we can beat them, and being really honest, when you sat back in the change afterwards, you realised that you didn't really believe you could beat them.
Yeah.
And we didn't. So that was for me the first time you played against them was just it was very special. The haka. Loads of people asked me about they do about the haka, and should it's unfair, this, that, and the other. I personally have always thought it's one of the great things about Test rugby. I think it's outstanding. I think it's an honour and a challenge to face it, and I've loved and I love it, and I love watching it even now. I just think it's so all that stuff that went with it. It's brilliant. But then we bloody lost, so it was like not good.
And but you must have some good memories. We can talk about a number of things, and some of them are well known. But also, you did go through a period. Firstly, you didn't play the Southern Hemisphere sides very much at all, collectively. But over the course of your time, you managed to beat them all. Like, that must be something you're hugely proud of, because not only, perhaps, as you mentioned, there's a bit of an aura around some of these teams you don't get to play very much, but also you don't get another crack as well. So you must have been, you can at least look back on your career and say that you beat all the Tri-Nation sides throughout the course of your career. And when you did do that, it must have been a great feeling.
Yeah, you want to win games, and actually you're sort of not really aware of that bit, but I wanted to beat. So for me, New Zealand, and it just shows for me, I'm sort of like a vindictive. So I played the '93 Lions tour when I was just shocking, and for all sorts of different reasons, no excuses, was really shocking. Summed up by Peter Winterbottom, who had been down, played in New Zealand. I got dropped, and I was sitting in a bar with Mike Teague, and Wince comes in. He hadn't talked to me for about a week, and I looked at him and I said, well, "What's wrong with you? You haven't spoken to me for a week." And he just went, "Because you've been shit." And I'm like,
okay.
Yeah. I said, yeah. And I sort of looked at him. I went, yeah, "Why does that?" But he went, "I told everyone down here you were good." He said, "So sort yourself out," and just got up and left. And I'm like, okay. So I played the '93, and then New Zealand came up and toured. So we played for London against them in the build-up to England. And Fitzy went for me big time, right? Any sort of ruck on what I was in, he was all over me. Yeah, shit. Man.
And you didn't know each other. Did you know each other at all then? It was just two captains really butting heads, was it?
So he was just going for me, and it was just, kicking the shit and just everything. And I remember just looking at him, it was just like, right. It won't repeat what I was thinking, but it's just like I said, if I get picked, Jesus Christ. And it was just like really revved up, and we managed to win that one in '93, which is the one time that I beat. But you're thinking it for me, South Africa, big, brutal, ultimate test in rugby as far as I'm concerned is playing the All Blacks. And I still think it is. I think history, it's skill levels, everything. I just think it's a hell of an experience, and loved it.
It's I've no doubt it's something you've been asked about numerous times as the '95 semi-final. But one thing, what a sort of day in rugby history a little bit as well. Like South Africa, bringing rugby back to that continent. They were really in their infancy in terms of getting back into rugby after apartheid. Jonah, rest in peace, is not with us today. And, obviously with my spectacles on, like it was a day when New Zealand played really well. Like it was a day they played, certainly for the first 20 or 30 minutes as good a rugby as they possibly could. And it's not something that, gets said in the game, but you managed to get a couple of tries in the game. You guys got a few tries back in the second half, but you were part of a really great rugby occasion, weren't you? I'm not trying to soften the blow of a World Cup semi-final too much, but now when you look back on it, it was a great game of footy. It was
incredible, and for me, it's just. And I talked to Zinny and Fitzy afterwards. You think, we beat them in '93, and so it was just that edge that it was just like, right, and we didn't have it, and we didn't find it, and it's weird, isn't it? And you go out, and I like to think you prepared yourself for most things as a captain. In the build-up the week, I never prepared myself for standing, talking to a team under the post, having conceded 4 tries in 20 minutes. That sort of thing just didn't happen. And it sort of was just, wow. Amazing. I mean, they were an amazing team. And then you had Jonah. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Who was incredible. So that was the difference. When you look at some of the players who were there that day and the way they played, it just was exceptional. And Jonah was just extraordinary. I mean, it's incredible. I sort of got him up as an ambassador for the 2015 World Cup. When you think, and it was the first game I remember sitting with him in the stand, and Nadalo was playing for Fiji against England.
Yeah.
And big he is, and he just nudged me. He goes, "Hey, well, still not as big as me."
Yeah.
And that's true. That you realise after all this time, when you think about how much fitter and stronger these guys are now, and Jonah was still just unique. It was incredible.
Colossus, and probably running on at different times, 40, 50, 60% with his kidneys. So it's just pretty amazing player. Look, you've touched on a little bit like some of the guys that you were able to play against in the black jersey, the legends of our game, Fitzy and Zinny and Jonah and these guys. Like, are these guys maybe friends today, or guys you catch up with when you see them again, and for whatever reason that may be, get to tell a few old war stories and maybe see them around at different fixtures?
Yeah, so I saw Zinny. Zinny was around for dinner not long ago. I see a lot of him. Obviously came up, coached at Quins.
Yeah.
Persuaded me to come back. I played a season with him, and he was, he's just outstanding. You just think you go out. I've been out with him loads of times. I've never seen his wallet. He's never bought it for anybody. So it's like, you know what I mean? He's clever. But yeah, Fitzy, when he came up, geez, he stayed with us when he first came up to England,
awesome.
in the house. But saw Mertz the other day when we were over in France, just sort of hanging around. He was just like...
Is that the Quins connection? Is that how you've got to know those guys? Like, obviously through international stuff, but also those guys also spent time at Quins?
Well, Zinny playing against them, yeah, and then Hong Kong's, and when he came up, I think you sort of get to know them, and the same with Fitzy got in touch. Mertz used to come in. We used to have a facility at Twickenham. We used to get a lot of the guys in after games when they were up.
He'd be outstanding. Yeah,
he was he was a funny boy.
Yeah.
He's good value, good fun. And we did a thing. For me, it was just like I got to know. We did a week. I was telling you before. There's a lady who's worked for us for 25 years, whatever. The Czech lady. She got married to a Kiwi. So Steve, rugby mad, he used to work with us at this facility. So he got to meet Dan and Richie and all these guys. And one of his greatest moments in his life was he used to go out to get the players from the tunnel. And obviously he'd gone back, and Dan sort of said, "Hey, Steve, good to see you again, mate." And he came in, he goes, "He knows my name," and I'm like, "Oh, hey," it was. And so we did a week with Tana, Richie, and Jerry Collins in London, some events, right? And Steve took the week off and was their driver, and it was the best week of his life. And it was just outstanding. We used to finish an event. We were driving to London, and Jerry just used to go, "Hey, stop here, bro," and he used to get out, and you would be like, "Okay, see you sometime tomorrow."
Yeah, totally.
Into the darkness he would go. It was just. What a man.
Yeah.
I just think it was, sometimes you're privileged to get to know lots of people and even stuff from different generations. But I think the thing that I love about rugby is different generations, different countries, same animals, basically.
Yeah, totally. I mean, another good soldier that we've lost, unfortunately, but the great stories about Jerry. I mean, gosh, he even went and played some club rugby in England that time, just off because some guy said, "Oh, you should come down and have a run around for us one day," and he turns up and plays for the second team because he wasn't registered. I mean, that is unreal, isn't it?
Yeah, not the same league, but and geography, for people down in New Zealand, but they were staying in Richmond.
Yeah.
So he rings me. So we were meeting for lunch the next day to sort of outline the week. So this was Sunday evening. He rings me. He goes, "Will," he goes, "where's a good bar in Richmond?" So I tell him. So I said, "There's a few bars down the river, Jerry." They were staying in this hotel in Richmond. So anyway, arrived for lunch the next day, and Jerry's there. I said, "Hey, how'd it go last night? Which bar did you end up in?" He goes, "Oh, someplace in Bristol." Right now, Bristol's 120 miles down the road in the West Country, right? And I'm like, "A bar in Bristol?" He said, no, I was in Bristol. I went, "How the hell, where?" And he said, "Oh, I was chatting to these guys in this bar, and they said, we're going to a party in Bristol." So I went, and you're just thinking, the guy's nuts. And I'm like, "How'd you get back?" I woke one of them, I shook him and said, "You've got to get me back to London." So he forced us to drive him all the way back to London.
And you're not arguing. You're not arguing with Jerry when he says you've got to give him a ride.
But it was just that great moment. Oh, yeah, ended up in Bristol. Right? And it was just like, what?
I believe
he was...
Yeah,
what a lovely guy.
Special human. Look, mate, as I said, okay, we play England a bit more, certainly a lot more than we used to when you were playing, and I think perhaps that's a credit to some of the previous coaches that they've made sure that they're playing the Southern Hemisphere sides a lot more, and I think that's why there's such awesome competition between the North and the South at the moment. But looking forward, England haven't been here in New Zealand for 10 years. your thoughts on the side, like how are they tracking? I know, there's a bit of a pretty of a rocky changeover between Eddie and Steve, but there's certainly signs of life at the World Cup, and certainly results-wise on an upward curve, perhaps.
Yeah, I think from what I hear, you think they struggled a wee bit in the World Cup. I think they're sort of pretty, which is a shame. And the same sort of start of the Six Nations, but I think the players have had a bit more of a voice about how they want to play, and I think certainly against Ireland and France, it's in a sort of a different approach, and I think that suits them more. I think they're enjoying it more, and it's going to be one hell of a challenge for them because New Zealand, despite the result in the final, is still probably the most complete team in terms of the way they can play. So for him, I'd be fascinated to see who he picks to go down there, who makes it, who doesn't make it. I think it's going to be tough and really, really tough. And I wonder. I think that's the bit that I'd like to see from England is in terms of a pack of forwards, we need a little bit more tough. We need some guys with a bit of edge, I think, and they're going to have to front up. Otherwise, it's going to be tough. It's going to be very hard for them.
Look, there's always some familiar faces, and Maro Itoje, and Marcus Smith's getting a bit more of a profile. Ben Earl, I thought was awesome during the World Cup. Is there a few guys, perhaps that you really like the look of, you'd love to see get game time, you think might be able to play well in this part of the world?
Yeah, I think. Hopefully. I'm not sure where he is, and Tom Curry might be back. I've always been a big fan of Tom Curry.
Good player.
We're going to need back row, him, Ben Earl. Fascinating, therefore, to see who he's going to go with at 8. Is he going to keep Earl at 8? I'm not convinced that's his best position, but he's going well. Maro, we haven't seen the best of Maro for a while, and we need that. We certainly.
That 2019 Maro in the semi against New Zealand was outstanding. He was absolutely top of his game at that stage, wasn't he? Yeah.
And is Manu still going to be, fit? You sort of think Manu, Slade in the middle. It's who's he going to pick at 10? Yeah. I think that's the thing. If you go with Marcus, Marcus will play. I love him, and I think England will to go that road. But it demands a completely different mindset from everyone around, and whether that's too much for Borthwick, I don't know. But it's at some point, surely he's got to embrace it, and we play. And I personally think for us to stand any kind of chance, we have certainly got to play against New Zealand. We can't play a restricted sort of game pattern. They're too good.
Mate, I hope so, because certainly some of the Premiership rugby I watch is pretty open and pretty free throwing, and there's some guys with some real pace. Marcus Smith's certainly one of those, but this is some pretty promising young guys. So I'm excited. It's always it's always not a funny year, but like post a World Cup, it's always really interesting to see what the teams do, and some players move on, some new players come through, and it's always Ireland have kept on rolling on, and the French look strong again, but. Perhaps England the unknowns, which is really exciting. Mate, I want to thank you for joining us. It's sort of 7 a.m. in the morning your time, giving us an hour. Awesome career. I love talking to players from that amateur area. It was so different, but a fantastic career, and I really appreciate you sharing a little bit of your experiences, and great to talk a little bit about times you played the All Blacks and players you're interacted with. So I really appreciate it. Thank you, Will.
No, hey, Rob, it's been a pleasure. Been honoured to be on, so I really enjoyed it.
No worries. Cheers, mate. Awesome.
The All Blacks podcast is powered by our official cloud software partner, SAP, helping our teams in black be the best run in sports. Hosted by Rob Dunn in the Hargrave Street studio. Produced by Carl Thompson from Blue and Ginge, the podcast producers. Video editing by Mac Leesburg, graphics by Western Design, content advising from Andy Burt, and commercial manager for the podcast is Valeska Hoth. Follow the All Blacks podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere you get your podcasts.